You're here with us, and it takes roots for our live report from the UN climate talks in Bonn, Germany. And we have several folks in the room. Thank you for your patience with us as we had to get set up. We literally have to come to a meeting room and get into place because they only let us in the meeting room once we have our reservation, but we're all settled in. We appreciate you being with us today. And we have an exciting report back for you all. But first, I want to just let folks know that we have interpretation set up. Today we have Portuguese English interpretation. And I apologize if we have folks who speak other languages. Usually we have the other language that we usually interpret is Spanish, but today we only have Portuguese because we were unable to secure Spanish interpretation, but we have a Brazilian comrade here with us. And so if you are able to turn on interpretation now, and you should see at the bottom of your screen a globe on Zoom, and you can click on the globe and select your language you would like to hear this webinar in, between English or Portuguese. And yeah, thank you all for joining us. And right now, I just want to start by welcoming us and letting you know that we have a group of folks from the It Takes Roots delegation and here in Bonn, Germany. It Takes Roots is a alliance of alliances, and for our work together in the UNFCCC negotiations, which stands for the UN Framework on a Convention on Climate Change. It Takes Roots consists of usually Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, Climate Justice Alliance, Just Transition Alliance, Indigenous Environmental Network, the Movement for Black Lives, Black Hive, La Via Campesina, the World March of Women. I think that's everyone. That brings together frontlines leaders and voices from across Turtle Island to participate and intervene in these very critical international negotiations on climate change and so-called solutions to climate change. And today we're at the Bonn this week, and next week we have several people here at the Bonn intersessional meeting, which is the meeting that happens in between the big COP conferences. COP stands for the Conference of the Parties. And last year's COP was in Dubai, United Arab Emirates in the fall. Next year's COP will, this year's COP in the fall will be in Azerbaijan. So in between them is this meeting, which is a technical meeting where negotiations continue on the various work streams and issues like just transition, Article 6, and which is false solutions and carbon markets, as you'll hear about today, and adaptation, mitigation, climate finance. All of these things move in this time. So we're going to first ground ourselves, and I want to introduce Grandmother Mary Lyons, who will offer a grounding for us before we dive into the discussion.
Bonjour, I'd like to start out with a grounding prayer for the elements and for the caregivers of this planet. Creator Gitchumani, we ask to sit in the center of forgiveness to calm the fires that are out of control. We ask to be heard throughout the four winds of Mother Earth's breath. We ask for you to reconnect us to feel the original organic heartbeat of life. We ask for our ancestral memories to be restored so we all remember the beauty of the original water vessels, our body. Creator Kichimani Do. We humbly ask for forgiveness as we struggle to keep our ancestral teachings alive. We humbly ask for courage to restore our ancestral strength to move forward as organic gardeners of our homelands. We humbly ask for bravery as we stand in the footprints of all whom walked before us to protect what we promise to take care of. We humbly ask for humility that we all will move together, neither one leading nor one following, when we continue walk side by side in balance for all. Creator Kichimani Do. We seek guidance from our ancestors in creation to respectfully remind all at the helm that they must remember we all share the pulse, one heartbeat. We seek the wisdoms of the elders from all corners of this planet to honor their ancestral libraries they carry from within. We seek truth as each of us move in a mannerism of consciousness. We seek out the platform where we all can feel safe and be heard. Creator Kichimani Do. Fill our ignorance with knowledge of times past. Fill each of us with strength so we can continue to hold the light of organic past. Fill each of us with unconditional love for all and everything that resides within this place we call home, Mother Earth. Fill each of us with potential so we will know when it steps backwards and we process our actions so we do not harm moving forward. Kichimani Do. Chimigwich, 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 Kichimani Do. May we all move in a good way and make pathways for the ones that will grow from our future seeds of life. Let's have a good meeting. Miigwech.
Much gratitude, Grandmother Mary. And you will hear more from Grandmother Mary about her time here and some of the reflections about the conference. But first, we'll hear from some other folks. And I wanted to give a little bit of grounding on what some of the big issues are here being negotiated at the UNFCCC at the Bonn climate talks. And then we'll hear from our other speakers about some of the details of what they've been following. So since the COP28 in Dubai, several items have been critical moving forward in this negotiation. And I'll just name a couple and we'll hear much more from our speakers about the details. As I mentioned earlier, Article 6 is a big item on the agenda. Article 6 is the provision of the Paris Agreement that outlines the governance of carbon markets, global carbon markets, which many of us know are false solutions. And so there's many elements of Article 6 attempting to be finalized here in Bonn. And we also have a really important work stream called the Just Transition Work Program. If folks have followed this process, this work program was set up and it uniquely to center the just transition. And this is a term that came from our movements. And Jose Bravo from Just Transition Alliance is here with us, and we'll share a little bit more about how that term has been showing up here as the UN and countries start to negotiate what kind of just transition can be agreed upon across governments and through the UN system. And then we have a lot of discussion happening around climate finance and money that needs to move in order to support the communities that are being impacted, the countries that are most vulnerable to climate crisis. So there is a new global goal called a new collective quantified goal on climate finance that is being negotiated here as well. This is a lot of words to say they're trying to identify a number, a goal for how much money needs to be raised to address climate mitigation, adaptation, all of these issues. It's a big piece of discussion that's being negotiated right now, actually, in another room, in a hall. And then you have lots of other issues coming up, like gender and climate. We've been talking about demilitarization and peace is actually on the agenda, not the formal agenda, but is part of the conversations since Dubai and Azerbaijan are talking about conflict and peace. So there's a lot of openings and also risks in that. And of course, I would be remiss to mention that for a lot of us here in inside the conference and especially outside the conference, we are confronted by the ongoing genocide of the people of Palestine. And that is very present here in these halls, in the room, as we witness the negotiations taking place under the context of the inexcusable occupation and genocide of the Palestinian people that continues to this day. And so you've seen a lot of actions and activity about that, which we'll mention in a little bit. So those are some of the things that are coming up, and it's a lot. There's a lot of conversations moving in different rooms. And now we'll hear from our speakers a little bit about some of the issues that they've been following. So I'm going to now pass it to Jose Bravo, Executive Director of Just Transition Alliance, who will share a little bit about how he's been following Just Transition here. And Jose, my question for you, our question is, can you speak in this moment on how you see Just Transition? Hold on just a second. Could you mute? So how you see Just Transition surfacing in the negotiations through the Just Transition Work Program, and what does it mean for you to see Just Transition become so mainstream in global negotiations, and what risks are there with that?
Thank you, Adrian. So again, I think this go around, part of the discussion's been, what constitutes a green job? And part of that discussion yesterday was actually brought forward by somebody, one of the heads of or vice president of LinkedIn. And, again, most of the times.
Tem duas traduções. Está com duas traduções no mesmo tempo.
So I think there's a problem with the translation. Elvis is saying there's two translators on at the same time. Sorry, folks. Okay, yeah. Okay. So the person from LinkedIn was basically saying, that green jobs have to do with the future. That negates the fact that in our communities and through our history and through the time that we've been on this planet, most of the work that is being done by indigenous people and farmers and many others are green jobs. And what he was saying was, a green job is basically somebody that has a degree, somebody that's prepared, somebody that wants to work on the future by working on projects such as, the electrification and solar and other things of that nature. So again, that's problematic because it does away with what, most of the contribution of jobs around the world is. The other piece that was a little bit problematic yesterday was the part of finance, right? It's like Adrian was saying, finance is the big thing here at the moment. But the finance conversation that's being had here in Bonn is about loaning money. It's not about funding. It's not about funding projects. It's not about funding solutions. It's basically that they want countries to get into debt. And that debt can also be, can also look like a just transition. So again, I think part of the problem here is the definition of a just transition, where in some instances, the definition of a just transition has really gone awry. It's basically now being looked at in some instances as false solutions, such as cap and trade and pollution trading and other things of that nature. And um, and we did a quick intervention yesterday just to mention where we were trying to set the stage again for the countries that were involved in that discussion around just transition about what really is a just transition, right? It's about those that are most impacted being at the table, those workers and communities that are living, and indigenous people that are living the legacy of contamination as well, not just looking into the future and saying, okay, let's move from here. The environment started today. And what a lot of people are saying here is that, we have to invest in tech. Well, we also have to invest in those communities that have been devastated by, again, the legacy of pollution, the legacy of war, the legacy of colonialism. All those types of legacies have to be addressed. If we don't address the issues of legacy impacts, then ultimately the theory of false solution that's being predicated here will only be for the few again, not for the many. So I wanted to mention that as a piece as well. Yesterday, we also met with the U.S. State Department. And part of the conversation we were having with the U.S. State Department is that we had a lot of concerns about people not having access, about the different things that are being said, as you'll hear from other folks, about the participation of youth and not just the presence of youth, right? A lot of that is very prevalent here at the moment. So I'll leave it there, but again, I think it's going to be a big lift to try to move some of these countries that are thinking of just transition is single vehicle electric cars and the such. So we'll leave it there. Adrian.
Thank you, Jose. So that's absolutely right. Just transition has been a big topic on the agenda. There's a formal negotiation happening, and a lot of what Jose shared is a reflection of how this term that came from our movements, Jose and some of the other folks in the room were at the meeting where labor and environmental justice groups said this is what we need to transition workers in our communities off of extractive industries, off of fossil fuels. That idea has made it here, and yet there is an unclarity about a shared definition, and there's vying about who should be included and what sectors, and are we talking about across the economy, across society. So that is really live right now. Jose mentioned some of the engagement of other constituencies like youth and indigenous peoples. So I want to pass it now to our comrade from Brazil, Elvis. And if Elvis can go on camera, I want to ask you, Elvis, to share if you can speak on your experience in these negotiations and the events here, what you've observed about indigenous peoples and youth and Global South leadership here.
Olá, obrigado, Ares. Como já foi apresentado, eu tenho dois nomes, na minha língua e em português. Eu me chamo Issacar, sou do povo Runicuim e eu estou na terceira participação do evento do UNFCCC.
Of the UNFCCC, and part of this international participation that I was there with the indigenous people, and as part of the youth as well. And the youth that are coming as leaders in this movement, we are having some difficulties in participation within this mechanism of the UNFCCC, and the difficulties and language justice. And it's kind of hard for us to understand the negotiations, what's happening there with the people that are in these moments. And many times we've been talking about language transit or language justice, and it's been tough for us. We haven't been able to really understand the questions, the dynamics of really what is happening. And this impacts our participation of the indigenous people, with us being able to understand what we are going to participate in the future in regards to the governments, in regards to the corporations, because they are the ones that do not want to listen to the indigenous peoples. And many times when we are here, we try to participate and we have no voice. Many times we are looked at in a way and not really understanding that our opinion is given, and they don't understand our experiences of us, the indigenous people, because we have a lot to contribute. And us indigenous peoples, we are not protecting just this year the environment. We are protectors of the environment ever since. And as a young indigenous person here on this path, to see these environmental questions and wanting to live in a better world, we are here among us also talking about the future. We are trying to understand that people are also talking so much about the future, but they don't want to open it up for the youth of the indigenous, who are really going through in our territories with the climate change in our territories. I can bring a lot of examples. For example, from the country that I am, the territory that I am this year, we have suffered a lot about climatic change in regards to the floods. Our people, we were severely impacted by the floods. And in this moment, we are very worried about how we're going to help our people in regards to food security, because most of our crops have been impacted by these floods. And this is an example where we want to bring to the authorities, to the governments, that so people can realize what we are going through and what we're talking about. Because a lot of times we feel that they don't really know, they don't really see. They think that they're doing the right thing, negotiations that are going through that are for great things, but they don't really see what we go through in our territories. That's how we feel. And I believe that we really do need the voice of the youth, the indigenous youth in these spaces, and also provide the opportunities for us to be able to share our voice and to be able to share our true message. So I would like to leave this here. Thank you all once again for the space. And I would like to also, thank those that are the youth, the indigenous that are coming through, living this reality and this climate reality. And that is it.
Thank you, Elvis. Again, that was Elvis Ferreira with the Federation do Povo Huniqui and Indigenous Environmental Network. Thank you for sharing your leadership in the space, bringing the voice of youth, young people, indigenous communities from your community in Brazil, where we know right now there are massive floods that are displacing hundreds of thousands of people. And this is the reality of folks on the front lines of climate crisis. And that reflects the urgency of these issues that we know, all of us know, our communities are being impacted now. So to continue this thread on some of the conversations around Indigenous rights and human rights, I want to pass it to Alberto Saldamando with Indigenous Environmental Network. Alberto has been following negotiations on Article 6, tracking false solutions and human rights. Alberto, can you share with us how false solutions have been showing up in this round of negotiations, and if there are places where there are opportunities and challenges that you've been experiencing?
Thank you, Adrian. I think it's, I'm going to try to avoid the UN language, which is somewhat complex and difficult to translate, but I'm going to use REDS, the reforestation, reduction of emissions from the forestations and forest degradation as an example of how these states are hungry for money and are going to be looking for more money in order to reduce their obligations to really reduce emissions. It is noteworthy that the IPCC, the scientific arm of the UNFCCC, identifies colonialism as a driver of global warming. It found that those who contribute the least to climate change, particularly indigenous peoples and local communities, are themselves people of color and are most severely affected. Colonialism is still a reality for indigenous peoples and local communities around the world. What began for indigenous peoples over 300 years ago in the United States in 1620 continues as a reality today. Enslavement, subjugation, and genocide follows our initial colonization, but we, as most of the colonized world, survive, and survival brings hope. At this U.S. conference on climate change, the negotiations for the steps, the parties of the Paris Agreement, called the CMA, have been busy looking for money. For example, a program called REDS, Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation, is considered the low-hanging fruit for carbon offsets. For indigenous peoples, REDS is and always has been a land grab. REDS has been an ongoing project that many states use to generate offsets and credits against their nationally determined contributions to the reduction of their carbon emissions. They claim that if they or private investors invest money in forests, that their emissions are reduced by the absorption of the carbon by trees. But their emissions are still in the atmosphere, not somewhere in Brazil, but they use these investments to generate offsets against their obligations to reduce their emissions. For example, if a country promises to reduce their emissions by 15 million metric tons of carbon, it could offset this obligation by 10 million tons generated by their investment in REDS. RED merely allows these countries to continue to pollute. More of these schemes are being discussed and negotiated here in Bonn. There is a section of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement that calls for non-market solutions, but many countries want to make projects under this section a source of carbon credit. Another scheme is carbon removals. Oh, man. They claim that removing carbon from the atmosphere will generate offsets, but the IPCC said 2 years ago that carbon removals is an unproven technology and poses risks to the atmosphere. The time that it would take to test and implement carbon removals would take more time than we have to keep global warming under 2 degrees. Indigenous peoples experience this racist colonialism land grab as violations of our human rights, both collective and individual. The loss of our lands and our sacred relationship to it, the loss of languages, cultures, and ways of life. The loss of our lands is the loss of our spiritual lives, our ceremony and song. This racist and violent privatized colonialism is imposed by transnationals on people and countries throughout the world. We experience it through the extraction of our resources, continued fossil fuel development, as well as the criminalization and persecution of our human rights defenders, those who defend the sacred. It is all about land and our sovereignty and self-determination, our ability to govern ourselves, to choose our own path to our own development. Clearly, the Paris Agreement, primarily Article 6, is itself a major problem. Carbon markets and credits as applied to the indices do not reduce emissions of anthropogenic greenhouse gases. They only allow the continuation of these emissions, further contributing to global warming. Putting a price on carbon makes it valuable and a tradable commodity. It commodifies our Mother Earth. The transition to a green economy is another scheme. Green economy produces massive human rights abuses. The UN-led REDS Plus program states are free to introduce their vision of development on indigenous forest lands, including cattle ranching, soya and palm oil plantations, fish farms, and other activities that not only displace indigenous peoples, but our relatives, those that fly, the four-legged, and those that crawl or swim, the fauna and wildlife. It depletes the soil and water and denies peoples their traditional means of subsistence. Many consider these programs genocide. Branding nature-based solutions as a climate solution is also a public relations scheme. The mainstream approach to NBS, naturally based solutions monetizes and finances nature by generating carbon offset credits for polluters to purchase so they can make dubious net zero emission claims. However, nature-based solution projects include much of what indigenous peoples have been fighting for years, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation, industrial tree plantations, and closures as protected areas, climate-smart agriculture, as well as forest, soil, coastal, and marine ecosystems, and other forms of life. Thank you. What?
Thanks, Alberto. Yes, as Alberto has shared, there's really a high level of risk here of the continued perpetuation of the existing systems, carbon markets and carbon removals. The items that nation states are negotiating are all loopholes that are trying to be designed into the global economy through these negotiations, through the agreements here. And we also know that these talks have been infiltrated by corporations, by fossil fuel lobbyists, which when we talk about the COPs, the big meetings in the fall, I think the last COP had over 800 fossil fuel lobbyists present in participating. And some of them are on country delegations. So they have been influencing directly the negotiations and the language to create these loopholes to allow companies to continue to pollute by buying carbon credits and setting up these global systems, these regional systems of carbon markets. And so this is a real threat to people's lives, land, and community livelihood. And something that many groups here are continuing to resist and advocate to make sure that there are adequate protections and that we don't perpetuate the ongoing extraction and destruction of communities. Thank you, Alberto. And finally, we'll come back to Grandmother Mary Lyons, who is also with Indigenous Environmental Network. And before I pass it to her, I just want to invite everyone to who's listening to share your reflections, your comments, your questions in the chat. And we will have some time for discussion. And apologies that the chat function is not set up. So you should submit your questions and comments to the Q&A function of Zoom. So you can see a Q&A at the bottom there. And we really welcome your questions and comments, and we'll have the discussion after hearing from Grandmother Mary Lyons. And Grandmother, you have also been following closely the negotiations, and I know that Indigenous rights has been something that you and IEN and several of our relatives here have been fighting to make sure are upheld through these negotiations. Can you share a little bit about how you've observed the ways Indigenous rights are being discussed at this meeting?
Yes, it's a really, really great question, I think, that many people have been asking. And, you know, I don't know how many times we can echo the answers. You know, if you're stick your hand in the fire, you pull it out, but they just seem to keep it in that fire, right? So being an elder and a knowledge holder, you know, I'm a wisdom keeper. The elders that walk these hallways are the truth, you know. We do know the menace that has occurred within the last 70 plus years. Because you see, it only took less than 150 years over in our territories, United States and Canada, in that way, pretty much globally through the world, to go from organic lands to chaos. And I'd like to just share something with you that, you know, I continuously read to the audiences of where my heart's at, you know, where this is at, you know, because humanity and nature go hand in hand. You know, one thing we need to do is we have to have accountability. You know, it's always question accountability. Implementation is in the question. Research is far from being valid here. You know, best practices within the health world has fallen short. To include the world's population voices of concern, one must examine the truth of each territories and not only the rights of people, but the rights of nature as well, because forgetting about that, you know, um, without nature, human beings just can't go on. So they seem to want to separate or put one or the other in an invisible uh, place where they can more or less manipulate what the better cause is for their pocketbook and not for all people's health. So to sit with the justice system throughout the globe, one must understand that meaning of one plate, one table. This is for all. It isn't segregated into a certain sector, is that we all depend on it. To understand finance, one must detach himself from greed and sit in the circles of wellness. To educate the population that one serves, one must sit amongst the weakness and understand what made them weak. Climate finance and carbon investments, the majority of the global population have very little understanding of what this really means and have limited knowledge to how it harms them. Wisdom and vulnerability is the base of what knowledge exists from. So how do we all move forward with a universal understanding? So we ask many questions. We continuously ask these questions to ourselves. What are some of the pressing responses we all would love to hear? Each time we sit in these meetings, we sit with such hope and such trust that we're going to hear, answers of the common responsibilities of what one human being should be responding to instead of, finding in the textbook and wasting so much time in this stuff to try to figure out what the answers when the answers are right before you. What are the what are the risks of the systematic water and air and earth violence? If you don't know it, you're either aiding and abetting it because of that ignorance of not knowing it. You don't really understand how you contribute to it. We all can respond to this. And as we understand in our homeland gardens, we all have to nourish from it. The thing is, if we don't understand our original gardens that we're supposed to be taking care of, you can hear the confusion of words that has no energy and no heartbeat. Everybody within the meetings that we're listening to are fighting to be politically correct. To see if we can put the right words in here that they will understand and that the majority of the world is either suffering or they're moving within their organic movement as time before. So I just think sometimes, and it's not my intention to harm anybody, that's moving forward, but you know what? Ignorance sometimes is really golden here. I love seeing the indigenous people. I love seeing elders. I love seeing the young people out there because this is our truth. This is our past and we're walking into the future. And if we don't really, it's not so much as finding the answers. It's you have to stop running from the answers. The answers are here. My main concern listening to here is with the indigenous people's knowledge, the knowledge of because we're the original gardeners, right? No matter what the interpretation says, the final results all add up to a global climate chaos, and no one, no matter how wealthy or how financially limited they are, they can't escape these impacts. The global platform will face the disruption in the quality of air, water, fire, and earth. We're in it now. This is man's introduction, the two-legged introduction to destruction, and we did it on our own. We always say the planet's going to go on, but the kindness of Mother Earth laid out such a small platform for us two-legged people to live on, and the majority seem to be ignoring that kindness, that provision that she allowed us, so this destruction's happening. But in the meantime, the original gardeners are striving really hard to make a life doable and livable for our future seeds. So this is what I'm hearing, and I have to be very, very careful, that the ethical protocol for the protection and use of traditional indigenous knowledge will be utilized before our knowledge is passed on to any of these bodies here, right? You know, we don't want to see what we share here being interpreted by other people and have a price on it, you know, because if we say something to use us as an additive for their naughtiness, you know, I hope this makes sense, but I'm still waiting to hear the doable words, you know? I don't want to hear $50, $100 more words in this stuff and what's appropriate in the codes and this stuff. You know, as much money as we spend here, we could probably solve a problem within a global community's needs. So, you know, this is just an elder speaking, you know, and if I don't speak my truth, I don't want to fall into that hole of falseness of words that they bestowed on all the people of the world, you know. Like I say, you know, if there's fire and if you put your hand in it, you pull it out. Simple as that. Miigwech, thank you for asking that question.
Thank you, Grandmother Mary, and we really appreciate you being here with us and sharing your wisdom. The elders with us here, and I know many who are not here, have so much knowledge that we need in order to endure as communities through these crises, and that this kind of space that is a kind of ivory tower space of countries negotiating actually needs to turn to in order to negotiate and to plan a kind of world that is resilient, that is based on sacred knowledge, that is based on traditions that have allowed our communities, our ancestors to endure over generations. So thank you for sharing all of that. We're going to turn very soon to the discussion. So I see some questions in the Q&A. Again, if you have some questions or comments, please share them. And we have a few minutes to have that discussion. And I just want to share a few reflections as well, based on what I've heard and what I know the direction of this COP is going. And so you've heard from our panelists some of the important items on the agenda on Article 6 and false solutions and carbon markets that are being finalized through this negotiation. And then you've heard about the Just Transition Work Program, which is a unique and new arm of the negotiations that started last year and is aiming to be finalized in COP30 in Brazil. And we're in the middle of a lot of conversation about climate finance because what just happened in COP28 in Dubai, the COP this past fall, was that countries completed the global stocktake, which is a UN technical term for how countries reported their emissions reductions are going. Have they met the goals laid out in the Paris Agreement? So the global stocktake is nearing completion, and now countries have to establish new goals for emissions reductions. So there's a big set of conversations about how do we create more ambitious goals and then mobilize our resources and economy and to be able to meet those goals. And that's why there's so much talk about money. There's so much talk about climate finance and making sure that the money that is being moved is equitable, is not all loans that create restrictive conditions, particularly for vulnerable and developing countries, but are moved directly to the communities that need them in a just and equitable way. And we are on this road to COP29 in Azerbaijan in the fall, and then COP30 in Brazil in 2025. And we have already been in conversation with many of our allies in Brazil, knowing that there's going to be so much movement in that space. There's going to be counter COP spaces so that we can really bring people power and voices into these negotiations and outside these negotiations to show that the people in the streets and in our communities in the forests and the rivers, in the places that we're from, are ringing the alarms in this moment of accelerating climate crisis. We've seen almost every summer is hotter than the last summer, and the floods and the storms impacting our communities. And it's well past time for real action and not false solutions. And the last thing that I want to mention is that, again, we are facing in this moment a horrific genocide that has already killed over 35,000 Palestinians in Gaza. The number is likely a vast underestimate. Many of them, thousands and thousands of them, are children. And the assault on Gaza and the destruction of neighborhoods is ongoing. It's happening today. And so war and the militarization of our economies is contributing to not only this level of death and destruction, but also to the climate crisis and the acceleration of it. Through, we know, the pollution that the military contributes, the unexploded bombs and ordinances that are left behind in places of conflict and war, the pollution that white phosphorus, this chemical that burns people, leaves behind. It actually also destroys the earth and the soil. And so this is a topic that is in the air, but it is also part of the conversation, because at Dubai last fall, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, introduced a uniquely a relief, recovery, and peace declaration. And there's already been conversations about how this work around peace is going to continue through the COP process. And Azerbaijan, the COP29 host country, has said COP29 is going to be a COP of peace. And it's really ironic that some of these countries that have had such strong wars and have been funding conflict in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa region, are actually trying to facilitate peace into the negotiations. So it's really up to us as stakeholders and peoples who are affected by wars and military pollution to actually get to the root cause. Because what's likely going to happen, what we've seen happen already here as they talk about this, is greenwashing, is to talk about the impacts of war and cleaning up bombs, but to not actually talk about how we need to reduce the size of our militaries. We need to stop war and genocide, because those are the things that are killing our communities, and those are the things that are contributing to climate crisis. The US military, for example, is the single largest institutional polluter of emissions of greenhouse gases. But greenhouse gas emissions from militaries are not included in these agreements. So there is a path here to push our governments to include military emissions, to talk about demilitarization as they talk about a peace COP coming. But we have to hold their feet to the fire, because it's likely to be greenwashed into something, just as we've seen in these other negotiations, that upholds the current economies and conditions. So we've been here also standing in solidarity with our siblings and families in Palestine. There have been actions here inside the COP space. Some activists did some actions and actually were ejected. Their badges were removed because they held up flags and called for the end to a genocide. And then there have been some actions outside as well. And we're navigating the complexity of the repression of the state of pro-Palestinian protests, while we're also trying to fold the intersections of these crises in this space. So it's a fight that's ongoing and very live. So I want to turn now to these questions. We have some really wonderful questions in the chat. And thank you, Pam, for her comment, recognizing Grandmother Mary's beautiful statement, how to walk into the future. And I'll read her question here. How can those of us who are not here voice our outrage at the path being taken? Does anybody want to take this question? Jose.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question, Pam. I think one of the ways that you could do that is by also giving us or sending us quotes of things that you believe should be talked about here and things back at home and how they are, and then your thoughts on things. Quotes are always good to have because we could always reference back to people back where we live and in those communities. I think that's one way. The other piece is keep abreast of the federal government's positions here in Bonn, right? Because they're all into the finance as well. So I think, writing letters, speaking to your Congress people, doing a bunch of other things that we normally do. And at the same time, just recognizing that if we weren't here, I think some of these people might have already baked the planet. Because ultimately, money is running roughshod here, and there's very little common sense. There's very little agreement, and at the same time, the ones that have the most to do with carbon emissions and pulling fossils out of the ground are the ones leading the discussion here. So I think putting pressure back at home is very, very important as well.
Thank you, Jose. And I invite the other panelists to share also if you have a reflection on what folks can do at home. But I also want to read this other question, which is related to what Jose just said, putting pressure on our folks back home. And for many of us here, not all of us, but some of us on this delegation are from Turtle Island, are living in the United States, and the U.S. is a heavy presence in this negotiations. They always are. And so Chloe has a question here from Climate Justice Alliance. Could you speak more on how the U.S. delegation has been showing up in negotiations, especially in conversations around climate finance?
Yeah, going back to the previous question first, I know Pam and others have been very active in demonstrations in front of the Wells Fargo and all the financiers of pollution. And also we have the divestment, asking people and institutions to divest from these banks. Also demonstrations in front of oil companies have been effective, I think, particularly where I'm from in Martinez, the oil refineries, trying to keep them from polluting the air. So we have a whole wide range of issues, methods that Pam and others are very well acquainted with in terms of raising our voices and speaking to the power. The United States has really been, it is a major donor. And as a major donor, it has a great deal of influence, particularly in the Green Climate Fund and also within the Adaptation Fund and other funds. They promised $100 billion. They estimate that they need $300 billion to really tackle the problem of adaptation, particularly in small island states. When those states are being flooded, the sea is rising. They're losing their sources of water and their agriculture. So they need money to be able to do things to adapt to those conditions. Samoa has lost islands, as a matter of fact. But the building of seawalls, transfers of technology, really there's another movement, technological movement to really restore the coral reefs, which is really the source of life for the oceans. So, but anyway, getting back to the U.S., they are a major donor. They do rely on the World Bank, and they tell the World Bank really what to do. So it's more of the same. One thing that has surprised me though about the U.S. delegation is I was in a finance meeting today, and and there was a great deal of support for small island states, developing countries, least developed states to receive grants, not conditionalities, but grants directly so that they can determine their own priorities and institute their own solutions. I was surprised that there was a great deal of support for that. And I think people were generally, states were generally in support of that. The US, I think, was supportive of that. So that was a pleasant surprise. But with regard to the rest of the issues, with regard to offsets and credits and nationally determined contributions, they really like markets. They think markets are the solution, and they're prepared to invest in those market solutions. And they are investing in market solutions. So in 6.2 and 6.4 cooperative approaches and the global market on offset. So in the sense, I think it's good that they're supporting small island states and the least developed nations, but the truth is that they're very powerful in other solutions, that in creation of markets and creation of false solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alberto. Thank you so much, Alberto. And as Alberto said, the U.S. is unfortunately and not unexpectedly an advocate for all of the things that harm our communities, and that we have been trying to fight in these processes in the international climate negotiations since some of our comrades have been here from the beginning. The U.S. has taken this historic role and continued role of being an obstacle to true climate justice in this space. We're already over time, and I am so surprised by how fast this conversation has gone. But I see BJ McNamara's comment in the Q&A. Thank you for your comments. There is an urgency we also need to convey, and recognizing the truth, not shaded by the veils of illusion, is paramount to the future. Together we triumph, divided we fail. And failure is not an option as long as Indigenous peoples help lead the way. Absolutely right. And as we close here, I want to invite any of the panelists to share any final reflections based on any of the questions that we've had come up, or anything else that you want to leave with everybody back home.
There's something that I heard as well today. We were sitting in several of the sessions, and the people that represent Samoa were talking about that they've already had to relocate 50 communities, that those 50 communities are no longer there, that folks are having to be put in other places. So that it's very, very crucial. And it's very, very important to address this issue, and that the responsibility should fall on those countries that cause the most pollution, right? So that was one. The other very interesting and sobering fact was the statement from the people from the Maldives that said that they can save their local oceans. They have over 1,200 different islands, and that they could save their local oceans and secure its food systems for $180 million. That's less than a rocket costs now that's going out there to pollute the ozone and space. And I think it's really important for us to make sure that people aren't left behind, and that maybe, you know, getting back to one of the questions that Pam posed, is that, you know, hey, you know, there's Tom Steyer there in San Francisco. He could literally put $180 million from his billion-dollar fortune into some of these countries so that they can literally survive.
I want to ask if Elvis, do you have any final comment, and then we'll close with Grandmother Mary.
Sim, Eu queria compartilhar uma coisa que Alberto
Yes, I wanted to share something that Alberto and
comentaram aqui.
Jose commented, something that they brought up, which was very selective and very important to say, because the people that are participating in the message, I wanted to share this message with other people to bring this to the reality that we live in the states, and the governors, the people that are in power, they really just have the importance of promoting what they're doing. And the more evolved countries, or the most financially well countries, being able to help these countries that are still developing is very important. And Brazil as well, with many companies and industries that are polluting the environment. And this brings a lot of difficulties for the people that are totally not involved in this, but are impacted in our communities, like the indigenous people, the people that are in extractive reserves. And the people really are not really interested in changing. They're interested in the money. And the reflections that I've been doing here and seeing with the people here is that we want to change the spaces that we come. We want to bring the ancestrality and the importance of our reality, and talk and speak in our language, and show and demonstrate that we have the experience to demonstrate to the people of the UN that we are talking to, that we have to influence, that we have to show them what really needs to be done in reality. And this is what I've been reflecting on and wanted to share. And thank you all for the space and for participating. Thank you.
Elvis has one tool.
E também eu queria, desculpa ter cortado aqui, eu
Also,
queria
sorry, I got cut off here, but I also wanted to say in 2025, we're going to have COP30, and we wanted to bring people together because we will bring COP to the Amazon. I'm not sure of people who will participate, but us here, the indigenous people, what we're going through in the Amazon, what we go through, we want to be able to share with you. So you can all come together with us. In 29, we're going to go and prepare for COP30, so we can also show people, so you can understand and see the indigenous people of Brazil, and how we can communicate with our single voice to be able to show society and show the people of the world that the indigenous people are very important to work with, to preserve, to bring a better world, to bring a better environment. And we have this essence of preservation since our ancestors.
Which in my language, that means thank you. As we close the cyber circle, it's for me, it's such an honor to be with my global family. I'm always happy to see everyone when I come. It's always sad when we get ready to close these, that my greatest fear is we can't see some of these individuals, because when they walk their truth and they walk their heights and out there, they come against such strengths that may take their lives, just speaking the truth, just to say, we need water, we need clean air. Just the simple things that were originally gifted to us. So I'd like to close this prayer with just acknowledging that. Chimiquich-Kichimani-du, thank you for these cyber circles that carry good intentions to move forward in a good way. Chimiquich to all the ancestors that have left an imprint of memory, so we'll never forget to stand strong. We remember the teachings of whom we really are, where we came from. We remember. We remembered what we were taught when times would be difficult, to go to the spiritual space. We remember all that was spoken of was appearing before our very eyes, the unfolding of our prophecies, they passed forward. We remember the keys of our past, our ancestors' past, to protect the ones that stored the seas of our future, the people. If one of us falls, all of us fall. If we allow the world to continue to paint us with invisible masks, we will disappear. If we remain silent, the outside world will cover up the wrongdoings of what they do to our people. If we stand together, all people, if we stand together, we will rise up as our ancestors once did for us to protect our future seeds. So I want to say Chi-miigwech and thank you for this time. And please stand and like we said, speak to the ones that are around to bring these incidents, these events and this stuff forward, because we're in a critical time. Chi-miigwech, thank you.
Thank you, Grandmother Mary. Thank you for the blessing, and thank you everybody for joining us this morning. And just want to let everyone know that there are folks who are still going to be here. It Takes Roots is still going to be here. The conference goes through next week. So please follow along on our socials, Just Transition Alliance, Grassroots Global Justice Alliance, Indigenous Environmental Network, to see all of the actions and what's going to be happening in the coming days of these negotiations. And you can go on our websites as well. If you want to get more resources, I saw someone asked a question about how to learn more. You can visit jtalliance.org, ienearth.org, and ggjalliance.org to find resources specifically about the COPs and the UN climate negotiations process. And we look forward to seeing you all back home and in the streets. Thank you so much for joining us.